The sound that broke the silence wasn't the polite chime of a dinner bell or the gentle clinking of crystal. It was the sickening wet thud of a body hitting the marble floor. My body. 7 months pregnant. At the bottom of the grand staircase I had so lovingly decorated for the holidays just days before. As my vision blurred and the world spun into a vortex of pain and terror, I saw 2 things I will never forget. The shocked, horrified faces of my parents and in-laws, their mouths agape. And above them at the top of the stairs, my husband, Julian. His face a mask of cold indifference, standing beside his mistress, Chloe. And she was smiling. No, not just smiling. She was cheering. Life with Julian Ashford was like living inside a snow globe. From the outside it was perfect, a picturesque scene of wealth, love, and privilege. Our wedding had been a feature in Vogue, a lavish affair at his family's sprawling Connecticut estate, a place of manicured lawns and ancestral portraits that watched with unnervingly stoic eyes. Julian was everything a woman was told to dream of: impossibly handsome, with eyes the color of a summer sky, and a smile that could disarm armies. He was the heir to the Ashford & Sons financial empire, a dynasty built on old money and ruthless ambition. I, Elara Vance, was not from that world. My parents, David and Sarah, were university professors. They had a cozy, book-filled home in Boston, where the richest aromas were old paper and my mother's baking. They'd given me a world of love, not luxury. When I met Julian at a university fundraiser, where I was volunteering, I was swept away by his charm, his attentiveness, his seeming adoration for my much simpler world. He said he was tired of debutantes and heiresses. He loved my authenticity. I believed him. Our first 2 years of marriage were a whirlwind of private jets galas in Paris and lazy Sundays in our stunning Manhattan brownstone. But slowly the gilded cage began to feel less like a palace and more like a prison. Julian's attentiveness waned, replaced by long, unexplained nights at the office. His charming smile became a tool he used to deflect my questions. His family, particularly his mother Isabella, never truly accepted me. To her, I was a common sparrow who had somehow managed to mate with her prized eagle. She treated me with a polished, venomous condescension, her compliments always double-edged swords. "That dress is lovely, Elara. It's wonderful how you can make high street fashion look almost couture." Discovering I was pregnant was like a sudden burst of sunlight in a darkening room. I thought a child, an heir, would change everything. It would solidify my place in the family, and more importantly, bring Julian back to me. For a while it seemed to work. He was ecstatic, touching my still flat stomach with a reverence I hadn't seen in years. He paraded me around to his family and friends, the proud father-to-be. Isabella even thawed slightly, beginning to plan the nursery with an iron fist, insisting on only the finest imported Italian furniture. The family gathering was Isabella's idea. A formal dinner at the Connecticut estate to celebrate the future of the Ashford line. It was a crisp October evening, the air smelling of wood smoke and decaying leaves. My parents drove down from Boston, looking slightly overwhelmed as they passed through the wrought iron gates, but they were determined to be there for me and their first grandchild. The estate was a character in itself, a sprawling Gothic revival mansion with more rooms than I could count, filled with dark wood, heavy tapestries, and an oppressive silence that even a house full of people couldn't quite pierce. The centerpiece was the grand staircase, a magnificent sweeping structure of carved mahogany that cascaded from the second floor down to the black and white marble foyer. It was beautiful, but standing at the top always gave me a dizzying sense of vertigo. That evening, the tension was a palpable entity in the room. Julian was agitated, constantly checking his phone. His father, Richard, a man who had long ago ceded all authority to his wife, was nursing a scotch in the corner, looking weary. Isabella was holding court, making passive-aggressive remarks about my parents' quaint academic life. My own parents were trying their best, smiling politely, while my father David kept a protective eye on me. "Julian, darling, put that phone away," Isabella commanded, her voice slicing through the strained conversation. "We have guests." Julian shot her a dark look, but pocketed his phone. He walked over to the bar to pour himself a drink, his movements stiff and angry. I followed him, placing a hand on his arm. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" I asked softly, my 7-month bump pressing against him. He flinched, pulling his arm away, as if my touch had burned him. "Everything's fine, Alara. Just business." His eyes were cold, distant. They were the eyes of a stranger. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a bad mood. Something was terribly wrong. My mother Sarah must have sensed it too, because she crossed the room and gently squeezed my shoulder. "Maybe you should sit down, dear. You've been on your feet for a while." Before I could answer, the deep, resonant chime of the doorbell echoed through the cavernous hall. The butler, a man named Peters, who had been with the family for 40 years, moved to answer it. "I'm not expecting anyone else," Isabella said, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in annoyance. Julian's face went pale. He downed the rest of his whiskey in one gulp and stared at the grand entrance, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. The heavy oak doors swung open, and a woman stood, silhouetted against the deepening twilight. She was tall and slender, dressed in a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was a sheet of raven black, and her red lips were curved into a smug, confident smirk. I didn't know who she was, but I knew with a bone-deep, gut-wrenching certainty that her arrival was the beginning of the end. Her eyes scanned the room, skipping over everyone else and landing directly on Julian. Then she spoke, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Julian, darling, you didn't tell me you were starting the party without me." Her name was Chloe, and she was the reason my perfect world was about to shatter into a million pieces. The silence that followed Chloe's entrance was so absolute, it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Every eye was fixed on her, then flickered to Julian, then to me. It was a triangle of betrayal drawn in sharp public lines. My parents looked utterly bewildered. Richard Ashford seemed to shrink further into the shadows. But it was Isabella's reaction that was the most chilling. There was no shock on her face, only a flicker of annoyance, as if Chloe's arrival was merely a poorly timed inconvenience, not a catastrophic breach of decorum and marriage. My heart was hammering against my ribs, each beat a painful thud. I looked at Julian, my husband, the father of my unborn child, silently pleading with him to deny it, to laugh it off, to call it a misunderstanding, to throw this woman out and wrap me in his arms. He did none of those things. He simply stood there, frozen, his face a canvas of guilt and fury. Chloe glided into the room, her heels clicking on the marble with predatory confidence. She completely ignored me, walking straight to Julian and placing a proprietary hand on his chest. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" she purred, looking around at the assembled family. My father David, ever the protector, stepped forward. "Who are you?" "I think you have the wrong house." Chloe laughed, a sound that was both musical and utterly devoid of warmth. "Oh, I'm definitely in the right house. This is where Julian lives, isn't it? Or at least where he lives with her." She finally deigned to look at me, her eyes raking over my pregnant form with undisguised contempt. "Julian," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Who is this woman?" He finally broke his silence, but his words weren't for me. They were for his mother. "Mother, I told you I would handle this." Handle this. The phrase echoed in my mind. This wasn't a random intrusion. This was something they knew about. My gaze shot to Isabella, and for the first time I saw the truth in her cold, calculating eyes. She knew. She had known all along. The nursery, the feigned excitement for the baby, it was all a charade. "Your timing is atrocious, Chloe," Isabella said, her voice like ice chips. "This is a private family dinner." "Oh, but I am family," Chloe retorted, her smirk widening. "Or I will be soon enough, once Julian finally gets rid of his little charity case." The insult hit me with physical force. "Charity case," I repeated, my voice cracking. "Julian, get her out of here now." My father commanded, his voice shaking with rage. He moved to my side, my mother right behind him, their bodies forming a protective barrier. "There's no need to be dramatic." "David," Julian said, finally finding his voice. He sounded like a petulant child, not a man caught in a lie. He pried Chloe's hand off his chest. "Chloe, this is not the time or the place." "And when is the right time, Julian?" She shot back, her voice rising. "You said you'd tell her after the baby was born. Then you said you couldn't. You keep moving the goalposts. I'm tired of waiting in the wings while she plays the perfect little wife in my house." "Your house," I choked out. "The brownstone." "Did you really think he paid for that with his trust fund?" "I paid the down payment. We picked it out together. You've just been living in it," she sneered. Every word was a poisoned dart finding its mark. The foundation of my life, the life I thought I had built with Julian, was crumbling beneath my feet. The home I loved, the future I imagined. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed deceit I had been too blind with love to see. Tears streamed down my face, hot and furious. "How could you, Julian? How could you do this to me? To our baby?" "Elara, just calm down," he said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture that only fueled my rage. "You're getting hysterical. It's not good for pregnancy. Don't you dare talk to me about my baby." I shrieked, a sound of pure agony tearing from my throat. This thing you've been doing behind my back while I was at home carrying your child. And you," I spun on Isabella. "You knew. You let me believe this farce." Isabella merely raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "My son's arrangements are his own affair. My only concern is the Ashford name and the continuation of our line. So the baby is just a means to an end. For you, an heir. And what about me? What was I supposed to be?" It was Chloe who answered, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You were the incubator, sweetheart. A suitable, simple girl to produce the heir. So there were no custody complications with someone from his own social standing. But your job is almost done." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I felt faint, the room tilting around me. I stumbled back, needing to put space between myself and these monsters. I backed away towards the grand staircase, my hand instinctively going to my belly, a desperate primal need to protect my child from the vipers in this room. "I want you out of my house," I said to Chloe. my voice gaining a sliver of strength from the protective maternal rage welling up inside me. "Technically, it's my house," Chloe mocked. "Get out!" I screamed, pointing toward the door. "Both of you, get out of this family's life!" Julian's face, which had been a mask of panicked guilt, suddenly hardened. The cornered animal was gone, replaced by something cold and reptilian. "You don't give the orders here, Alara," he said, his voice dangerously low. He started walking toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. "Stay away from her, Julian," my father warned, moving to intercept him. But Julian just pushed past him. "This is between me and my wife." He advanced on me until I was backed up against the newel post at the top of the stairs. The dizzying drop was right behind me. His sky-blue eyes were now stormy and dark. All the love I thought I had seen in them was gone, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. "You've made a scene, Alara." He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper only I could hear. "You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed my family. This was all supposed to be handled cleanly, quietly. But you had to make it dramatic." "Dramatic?" I gasped, incredulous. "You brought your mistress to a family dinner while I'm 7 months pregnant with your child, and you think I'm being dramatic?" My words seemed to be the final spark. Something inside him snapped. The last vestige of the man I thought I knew vanished, replaced by a complete stranger, a monster wearing my husband's face. "You were never good enough for me," he snarled. "You were just convenient, and now you're an inconvenience." His hands came up not to hold me, not to comfort me, but to shove me. Time seemed to warp and stretch in the moment before the fall. I saw it all with a horrifying, preternatural clarity, the way Julian's knuckles whitened as he balled his fists, the ugly sneer that twisted his handsome features into something grotesque. The final chilling thought that flashed through my mind was not one of fear, but of utter disbelief. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But he did. His hands slammed into my shoulders with brutal force. It wasn't a stumble or an accidental trip during a heated argument. It was a deliberate, two-handed shove executed with cold, calculated intent. The force of it lifted me off my feet, my center of gravity destroyed in an instant. My back hit the empty air. For a split second there was nothing but a terrifying weightlessness. The grand chandelier in the foyer seemed to rush up to meet me. I saw a kaleidoscope of inverted faces below. My mother's, her mouth open in a silent scream. My father's contorted in a mask of pure rage and disbelief. Richard Ashford, his face ashen, looking utterly impotent. Isabella, her expression unreadable, a statue of marble and ice. And then I heard it. A sound that would be seared into my memory, forever more painful than any physical impact. From the top of the stairs, Chloe's voice rang out, sharp and triumphant. "Yes," she cried, followed by a short, sharp clap of her hands. It wasn't just a cheer. It was a victory cry. The sound of an obstacle being removed. My body twisted in mid-air, a clumsy, desperate attempt to protect my belly. The world spun, mahogany banister, flocked wallpaper, startled ancestral portraits, and then came the impact. The first blow was to my side, against the unforgiving edge of a stair, knocking the wind from my lungs with a gasp. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded through my ribs. Then I was tumbling a rag doll with no control, each bounce and thud a fresh burst of agony. My head cracked against a baluster, and the world dissolved into a shower of glittering, painful stars. I felt a sickening snap in my wrist as I tried to break my fall. Finally, with a bone-jarring finality, I landed at the bottom, My body lay twisted and broken on the cold, unforgiving marble of the foyer floor. For a moment, there was a stunned, absolute silence, broken only by Chloe's triumphant little laugh from above. It was a sound of pure evil. Then chaos erupted. "Elara!" My mother's scream was primal, a sound of pure maternal terror that ripped through the silence. She and my father were scrambling down the stairs, their faces etched with a horror no parent should ever have to witness. "Call 911! Somebody call an ambulance!" My father roared, his voice cracking with panic as he knelt beside me, his hands hovering, afraid to touch me, afraid of the damage he might cause. I tried to speak, to tell them I was okay, but the words wouldn't come. A coppery taste of blood filled my mouth. My vision was swimming, the edges darkening. The pain was a living thing, a roaring inferno consuming my entire body. But there was a deeper, more profound terror that eclipsed even the physical agony, my baby. My hand, the one that wasn't broken, fluttered weakly to my abdomen. I couldn't feel her. No kick, no flutter, no familiar pressure. Just a dull, terrifying ache and a spreading warm wetness that I prayed was not what I thought it was. My baby. I managed to rasp the words, barely a whisper. The baby. It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. My mother sobbed, her tears splashing onto my cheek. Help is coming. Just hold on. Through the haze of pain, I looked up past my frantic parents. At the top of the stairs, the scene was a twisted tableau. Julian hadn't moved. He stood there looking down at the wreckage he had created, his face pale, but his eyes hard. The mask of the concerned husband was already beginning to form. This wasn't the act of a man who had lost his temper. This was the act of a man who had just executed a plan. Beside him, Chloe was no longer cheering. She was leaning against the banister, watching the scene unfold with a detached, almost clinical interest, as if she were watching a particularly dramatic scene in a movie. And Isabella was already in motion. She swept down the stairs, not towards me, but towards my father, who was fumbling with his phone, his hands shaking too badly to dial. "Give me that," she commanded, snatching the phone from his hand. "Peters, show the paramedics when they arrive. Richard, go to my study and call our lawyer, Bill Masterson. Tell him there's been an accident." An accident. The word cut through my pain-fogged brain. She was already spinning the story, crafting the lie. They weren't trying to save me. They were trying to save themselves. My father looked at her, his face a mask of incandescent fury. "An accident. Your son just pushed my pregnant daughter down a flight of stairs. We all saw it. You saw a hysterical pregnant woman lose her footing during a heated discussion," Isabella corrected him, her voice lethally calm as she spoke to the 911 operator. "My son tried to catch her. It was a terrible, tragic accident." The lie was so brazen, so complete, it was almost brilliant in its audacity. They were going to erase the truth right here, right now, while I was bleeding on their floor. As the first distant wail of sirens pierced the night, my consciousness began to fade. The faces above me blurred into indistinct shapes. But before the darkness claimed me completely, my eyes met Julian's one last time. In their depths I saw no remorse, no regret, no fear. I saw only the cold, hard glint of a problem being solved, and I knew with a chilling certainty that would follow me into the abyss that this was not the end of his plan. It was just the beginning. I awoke to the rhythmic, metronomic beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile antiseptic smell of a hospital. A dull, throbbing pain radiated from every part of my body. My left wrist was encased in a heavy plaster cast, and a sharp stabbing sensation in my side made every breath an effort. But none of that mattered. My first conscious thought, my only thought, was a frantic, desperate question. My hand, the one that wasn't broken, flew to my stomach. It felt different, smaller, emptier. A tidal wave of panic washed over me. My baby. I croaked, my throat raw. Where's my baby? My mother, who had been asleep in a chair by my bedside, jolted awake. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, etched with exhaustion and grief. Elara. Oh, thank God. You're awake. Mum, the baby. I insisted, my voice rising with hysteria. Is she? I couldn't finish the sentence. The possibility was too monstrous to even voice. Shh, darling, shh. She took my hand, her touch a small anchor in a sea of terror. She's alive. She's here. Relief so potent and overwhelming it left me weak, flooded my system. She's okay. My mother's face crumpled slightly, and the terror returned. She was born last night, an emergency C-section. She's very small, Elara. 7 weeks premature. She's in the neonatal intensive care unit. She's a fighter, the doctors say. She's a real little fighter. The words barely registered. Born. She was born. In the violent chaos of the fall, my daughter had been forced from the safety of my body into the harshness of the world. I was a mother, but I hadn't even had the chance to hold my child. Tears I didn't know I had left streamed from my eyes. Tears of relief, of fear, of rage. A nurse bustled in, checking my vitals, her expression one of practiced professional sympathy. It's good to see you awake, Mrs. Ashford. Your husband has been waiting outside. He's been here all night. Shall I let him in? The name Mr. Ashford sent a jolt of ice through my veins. The memory of the fall came rushing back, not as a confusing blur, but in stark, vivid detail. The shove, Chloe's cheer, Isabella's cold command to call the lawyer. No, I said, my voice hard and clear. I don't want to see him. The nurse looked taken aback, but nodded. Of course. Your parents are here. Do you need anything? Pain medication? I shook my head, though every part of me was screaming in agony. I needed to clear my mind. I needed to think. After the nurse left, my father came in. He looked 10 years older than he had the day before. The fury in his eyes had been banked, replaced by a deep, simmering resolve. The police were here, he said, his voice low. They took a preliminary statement last night from everyone. What did they say? I asked, dreading the answer. Exactly what you'd expect, he replied, his mouth a thin, hard line. The Ashford version of events. Isabella did most of the talking. She painted a picture of you as an emotionally unstable pregnant woman, distraught over a simple misunderstanding. She said you got dizzy, stumbled, and that Julian lunged to save you, but only managed to make you lose your balance more. A tragic accident. And Chloe. They claimed she was a business associate of Julian's, who arrived at an inopportune moment. They said her cry of, yes, was a misheard heads up or some other nonsense. They're unified. Richard, Isabella, Julian, a perfect united front of lies. The audacity of it was suffocating. They were going to gaslight me, gaslight the police, gaslight the whole world into believing their fiction. As if on cue, the door to my room opened, and Julian walked in, ignoring my explicit instructions. He was holding a ridiculously large bouquet of white lilies, and his face was arranged into a mask of heartbreaking concern. It was a masterful performance. Elara, my love, he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Thank God you're awake. I was so worried." My father moved to stand between Julian and my bed. "She said she doesn't want to see you." "David, please," Julian said, his eyes pleading. "This is a family matter. I need to speak to my wife." He looked at me over my father's shoulder. "Darling, I am so sorry. I tried to catch you. I swear I never would have let this happen." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Looking at him now, I saw the monster clearly. The charming man I had married was just a costume. "Get out," I whispered. "What?" He feigned confusion. "I said get out." I screamed the effort, sending a jolt of pain through my ribs. "I know what you did, Julian. I felt you push me." I heard her cheer. "You tried to kill me. You tried to kill our daughter." He actually had the nerve to look wounded. "Elara, sweetheart, the fall, the medication. You're confused. You're not thinking clearly. We all saw what happened. It was an accident." He took a step closer, and it was then that I saw it. On his expensive custom-made shirt cuff, there was a tiny, almost invisible speck of something, a faint red smear. Makeup. The same blood-red shade of lipstick Chloe had been wearing. He hadn't even bothered to wash his hands of her before coming to play the part of the grieving husband. That tiny detail broke the last thread of my composure. "There was lipstick on your cuff, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "Chloe's lipstick. Were you holding her hand for comfort after you pushed your pregnant wife down the stairs? Or did she kiss you for a job well done?" The color drained from his face. His mask of concern faltered, and for a fleeting second I saw the cold fury from the night before. He had underestimated me. He thought I would be a broken, weeping mess, easily manipulated. "You're delirious," he snapped, his voice losing its gentle edge. "Isabella warned me this might happen, that the trauma might make you fabricate things. Isabella can go to hell, and you can go with her," I spat. "Get out of my room before I start screaming for security." My father put a firm hand on Julian's chest. "You heard her. Leave. Now." Julian stared at me for a long moment, his eyes promising retribution. Then he turned, placed the lilies on a table with a thud, and stormed out of the room. As the door closed behind him, a terrifying realization settled over me. This wasn't just a divorce battle. This wasn't a custody fight. This was war. The Ashfords, with their limitless money, their powerful lawyers, and their complete lack of morality, were going to try to destroy me. They would paint me as crazy, unstable, and unfit mother. They would use my trauma against me. Lying in that hospital bed, broken and battered, I felt a surge of something stronger than fear or pain. It was rage. A cold, hard, diamond-sharp rage. They had tried to take everything from me. My life, my child, my sanity. They had failed, and I would make them pay. I looked at my parents, their faces a mixture of fear and pride. "Dad," I said, my voice steady now. "Call Liam, my friend from law school, the one who works in criminal defense. Tell him to get here now, and tell him to bring the best private investigator he knows." The first time I saw my daughter, she was in a clear plastic box, a fragile bird-like creature hooked up to a dizzying array of wires and tubes. They wheeled my bed down to the NICU, the journey through the sterile corridors, feeling like a pilgrimage. She was so tiny, her skin almost translucent, her chest rising and falling with the gentle puff of a ventilator. I pressed my hand against the incubator, a pathetic substitute for holding her, and whispered her name for the first time. Lily. I chose the name because lilies represent rebirth and resilience. In that moment, looking at her tiny, perfect face, her fists clenched as if she were already fighting, I knew she was the embodiment of both. She was my reason, my purpose, the fire that would fuel me through the darkness ahead. Every beep of her monitor was a reminder of what Julian had tried to extinguish. My old law school friend Liam Gallagher arrived that afternoon. He was the opposite of the Ashfords' sleek corporate lawyers. Liam was sharp, a little scruffy, with an Irishman's love for a good fight and an unshakable moral compass. He listened intently as I recounted the events, my parents occasionally interjecting with their own observations. He didn't interrupt his pen scratching furiously across a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Okay," he said. "This is David versus Goliath Ilara. Their version is neat, tidy, and backed by a fortune that can buy the best legal team in the state. They will say you're suffering from postpartum psychosis, that the trauma of the accidental fall has caused delusions. They will use your grief and anger as weapons to prove you're unstable." "But we all saw him push me," my mother insisted, "and they will say you are biased parents naturally siding with your distraught daughter." Liam countered gently. "It becomes a he said, she said situation, and in those cases the side with more power and influence often wins." "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice flat. "We fight smarter," Liam said, a spark lighting up in his eyes. "They have a narrative. We need to dismantle it piece by piece with irrefutable facts. The private investigator I work with, a guy named Marcus Thorne, is the best. He's ex-NYPD, and he can find a grain of sand in a desert. I've already put him on it." The first move from the Ashford camp came swiftly. A team of lawyers led by the legendary and notoriously ruthless Bill Masterson filed a motion to be granted temporary medical guardianship over me, citing extreme emotional distress and delusional ideation. It was a transparent, disgusting ploy to control my medical care, my access to Lily, and the narrative. They wanted to isolate me, to have their own doctors declare me mentally incompetent. Liam fought it with a ferocity that stunned me. He got sworn, notarized affidavits from my parents and the entire staff of my OB/GYN's office, all attesting to my stable and happy mental state throughout the pregnancy. He brought in a renowned independent psychiatrist who interviewed me and declared me traumatized, but perfectly lucid and competent. The judge, a stern but fair woman, named Judge Carol Riley, saw through the Ashfords' maneuver and threw their motion out, granting my parents temporary power of attorney at my request. It was the first small victory, and it felt like moving a mountain. The days that followed were a grueling routine. Physical therapy to learn to walk again, agonizing sessions with a hand specialist for my shattered wrist. And every precious hour I spent by Lily's incubator, reading to her, singing to her, telling her stories about the world that was waiting for her. She was getting stronger. Her lungs were developing. She was gaining weight. And one day, she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine with a surprising strength. That small act of connection felt more powerful than the entire Ashford Empire. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne, the PI, began his work. He was a quiet, observant man who blended into the background. He started by digging into Julian and Chloe. Julian's carefully curated public image began to crack under Marcus's scrutiny. He wasn't just a philanderer, he was a financial predator. Marcus uncovered a pattern of Julian charming, wealthy older women getting access to their finances through investment opportunities and then leaving them high and dry. Chloe, whose real name was Charlotte Jenkins, was not the wealthy socialite she pretended to be. She was an ambitious grifter from a poor background with a string of minor fraud charges and a reputation for attaching herself to powerful men. She and Julian were a match made in a sociopath's heaven. But the most damning discovery was about the finances of Ashford & Sons. My father, being a brilliant economics professor, had helped Richard Ashford restructure the company years ago, and as a gesture of thanks, they had set up a significant trust fund in my name upon my marriage to Julian. A trust fund that I controlled. It contained a large block of non-voting shares, but it had clauses, one of which stipulated that upon the birth of a legitimate heir, control of the trust would become joint between me and Julian, and in the event of my death it would pass to him entirely provided the heir survived. If both the heir and I died, it would revert to the Ashford main estate. He wasn't just trying to get rid of you to be with Chloe, Liam explained, pacing my hospital room. He was trying to get his hands on that trust. Your pregnancy complicated his timeline. If he divorced you, you'd walk away with the trust intact. But if you had a tragic accident and died but the baby survived, he would get control of millions. The cold, mercenary logic of it was sickening. I wasn't a wife to him. I was a financial instrument. Our child had a key to a vault. But how do we prove it? I asked. It's a great motive, but it doesn't prove he pushed me. We're working on it, Marcus said, his voice a low rumble over the phone. The Ashfords are buttoned up tight. The staff at the estate are loyal or scared. No one is talking. Just as we hit this wall, the Ashfords launched their next attack. They filed for dual custody of Lily. Their petition was a work of fiction, painting me as a vindictive, mentally fragile woman from an unstable background who was manipulating her child's health for financial gain. They included a fabricated story about me threatening to harm myself and the baby earlier in the pregnancy. It was pure, unadulterated evil. Reading the court documents, I felt a wave of despair so profound it almost drowned me. How could I fight this? They were creating an entirely false reality and had the money to make the people believe it. That night, as I sat by Lily's incubator watching her sleep, I felt utterly defeated. I rested my head against the plastic, the barrier between me and my child, and I wept. A soft-spoken nurse, a woman named Maria, who had been particularly kind to me, came over and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. She was an older woman from El Salvador, with kind, weary eyes that had seen too much. "She is a strong one, your Lily," Maria said in her gentle accented English. "I hope so," I whispered. "She's going to need to be." "Children know," Maria said softly. "They know who loves them. The courts, the lawyers. They are just noise. The heart of a mother. That is the truth." Her simple words of kindness were a balm. But then she hesitated. She glanced around the quiet, dimly lit NICU, as if to ensure no one was listening. "Senora Ashford," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Forgive me. It is not my place. But my cousin works at the estate in Connecticut, as a housekeeper." I sat up, my heart suddenly beating faster. "The Ashford estate?" Maria nodded, her expression fearful. "She is afraid. They are powerful people. She has a family to feed. But her conscience, it eats at her. She saw something that night. Something before the accident." A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, clearing away the despair. "What did she see?" Maria wrung her hands. "She is afraid to speak, but she told me. She saw Mr. Ashford and the other woman, the one in the red dress. They were on the stairs. An hour before the guests arrived. They were practicing. Practicing. I repeated, my blood running cold. Yes, Maria whispered, her eyes wide with fear. He was showing her how a person could trip, how to make it look like an accident. He pushed her, but gently. They were laughing. Maria's words hung in the sterile air of the NICU, more potent than any medicine. Practicing. Laughing. The image was so monstrous, so utterly depraved, that it took my breath away. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous angry shove. This was a premeditated, rehearsed act, a performance for which I was the unwitting and intendedly final audience. Her name, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of horror and hope. What is your cousin's name? Isabella, Maria whispered, a flicker of a sad smile on her face. Like the lady of the house, my aunt had a strange sense of humor. Her name was Isabella Rossi. Getting Isabella Rossi to talk was like trying to coax a terrified mouse out of a wall. She was petrified of the Ashfords. They weren't just her employers. They were feudal lords who controlled the livelihoods of half the town. Losing her job was the least of her fears. She was afraid of what they might do to her family if she spoke out. Liam and Marcus handled it with incredible sensitivity. They met her not in a sterile office, but at her sister Maria's small, cozy apartment, a world away from the cold marble of the Ashford estate. Marcus, with his calm and reassuring demeanor, explained the legal protections for witnesses. Liam laid out the case, not as a legal strategy, but as a fight for justice for a mother and her baby. Tearfully, Isabella recounted what she had seen. She had been polishing the silver in the dining room, the doors to the foyer slightly ajar. She'd heard Julian and Chloe's voices and their laughter. She peeked through the crack and saw them at the top of the grand staircase. She described the scene exactly as Mariah had Julian demonstrating how someone could accidentally be knocked off balance, Chloe playing the part of the falling victim. Both of them laughing as if it were a game. She had thought it was a sick, bizarre joke at the time and had hidden herself away deeply unsettled. When she heard my scream later that night, she knew instantly what had truly happened. Isabella Rossi's testimony was the crack in Ashford's fortress. It was motive and premeditation delivered by a credible, sympathetic witness. But Liam knew it wasn't enough. The Ashford lawyers would tear her apart on the stand, paint her as a disgruntled employee, a liar seeking a payout. "We need more," Liam stated during a strategy session in my new, much smaller apartment, which my parents had helped me secure after I was discharged from the hospital. "We need something they can't dismiss as hearsay. We need something concrete." That something concrete came from an unexpected source, Richard Ashford. Marcus had been digging into Richard's life, assuming he was just a spineless accessory to his wife and son's crimes. But what he found was a man living in quiet desperation. Richard was a prolific, albeit secret, gambler. He had debts, massive ones, to some very dangerous people. And Julian knew it. Our next breakthrough came from a deep dive into the Ashford & Sons company servers. Liam hired a forensic accountant who, after weeks of peeling back layers of complex financial transactions, found a black hole. Millions of dollars were being siphoned out of the company through a series of shell corporations with untraceable names. The transactions were authorized by a single executive IP address, Julian's. He was embezzling from his own family's company on a colossal scale. "And here's the kicker," the accountant said, pointing to a line on a spreadsheet. "The siphoning started 18 months ago, but it ramped up exponentially in the last 6. He was getting sloppy reckless. Someone was bound to notice." "Me," I whispered, realization dawning. A few weeks before the incident, Julian asked me to sign some papers from the trust. He said it was routine portfolio diversification. I told him I wanted my father to look them over first. David is an economist. I trust his judgment. Julian got furious, said I didn't trust him. He eventually dropped it, but he was furious. Liam's eyes lit up. Let's see those papers. It took some doing, but we managed to get copies from the trust's administrative office. We sent them to the forensic accountant. The verdict came back in less than an hour. They weren't diversification papers. They were authorization forms that would have given Julian sweeping discretionary power over the trust's principal assets. It would have allowed him to use the trust as collateral to move its funds through his shell corporations, effectively giving him access to the very money he needed to cover up his embezzlement before the annual audit. He wasn't just trying to get the trust after your death, Liam explained, piecing it all together. He was trying to get access to it before the audit. You asking your father to review the papers threw a wrench in his plans. He was on a deadline. The company audit was scheduled for November. He was running out of time and options. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. Julian was using his father's gambling debts as leverage. Cover for me, Dad, or I'll expose your debts to Mom. And we all know what she'll do. Richard, trapped between a rock and a hard place, had chosen to protect his son, becoming a silent partner in the lie. We now had the complete picture. It wasn't just a story of infidelity. It was a story of massive financial fraud, blackmail, and attempted murder for profit. Julian didn't just push me to be with Chloe. He pushed me because I was an obstacle to the biggest heist of his life. He needed me out of the way, either dead or declared mentally incompetent, before the auditors arrived and his entire house of cards came crashing down. Armed with this mountain of evidence, Isabella Rossi's witness statement. The proof of embezzlement, the fraudulent trust documents, and Richard's gambling debts. Liam went to the district attorney's office. He laid out the entire sordid story. The DA, a sharp, ambitious woman who smelled a high-profile conviction, listened intently. The tragic accident was now looking like a meticulously planned, financially motivated attempted murder. She convened a grand jury. Indictments were handed down for Julian Ashford on charges of attempted murder, aggravated assault, and multiple counts of felony fraud and embezzlement. Chloe Jenkins was indicted as a co-conspirator for attempted murder and for fraud. And in a move that shook the Connecticut elite to its core, Isabella and Richard Ashford were indicted for obstruction of justice and conspiracy after the fact. The Ashford Empire, which had stood for generations on a foundation of power and intimidation, was about to be brought to its knees by a quiet housekeeper, a brilliant accountant, and a woman who had simply refused to be broken. The trial was a media circus. The story had everything old money. A beautiful victim, a handsome villain, sex betrayal and attempted murder. The press dubbed it the staircase scandal. Every day we had to push through a throng of reporters and camera crews to get to the courthouse. The Ashfords would arrive in a black town car, Isabella looking regal and defiant, Julian looking like a wronged martyr, and Richard looking like a ghost. Their defense strategy was exactly what Liam had predicted, to assassinate my character. Their lawyer, Bill Masterson, was a master of insinuation and theatrical outrage. He painted me as a gold-digging, hysterical woman from a lower-class background who had become unhinged by the pressures of her pregnancy and the realization that her husband was leaving her. He claimed I had launched myself down the stairs in a desperate, manipulative bid for sympathy. It was excruciating to sit there and listen to the lies, to have my deepest pains twisted into weapons against me. But every time I felt my resolve waver, I would look at a picture of Lily on my phone. She was thriving now, a beautiful, healthy baby who had finally come home from the hospital. She was my anchor, my strength. I was doing this for her. The prosecution, led by the unflappable DA named Adrienne Powell, built their case methodically. They started with the doctors and paramedics, who testified to the severity of my injuries, establishing that they were consistent with a violent multi-impact fall, not a simple trip. Then my parents took the stand, their testimony heartbreaking in its raw honesty. Masterson tried to rattle my father, accusing him of having a vendetta against Julian, but my dad remained steadfast, looking the jury in the eye and stating, "I saw what I saw. He pushed my daughter." The turning point of the trial was Isabella Rossi. When she walked to the witness stand, she was visibly trembling, a simple, hard-working woman thrust into a world she didn't understand. Masterson was merciless in his cross-examination, sneering at her, questioning her memory, her eyesight, her motives. "Isn't it true, Ms. Rossi, that you were fired from a previous job for stealing?" he boomed. "No, sir," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "That is not true." "Isn't it true that Ms. Vance's lawyers are paying you for this testimony?" "No, sir. They are paying for my protection because I am afraid of what your clients will do to my family. But they are not paying me to lie. I am here because God will not forgive me if I stay silent." Her simple, powerful sincerity resonated with the jury in a way no legal theatrics could. You could see it in their faces. They believed her. Then came the financial evidence. The forensic accountant walked the jury through the labyrinth of shell corporations and illegal transfers, presenting a clear, undeniable trail of fraud leading directly to Julian. The fraudulent trust papers I had refused to sign were presented as Exhibit A for his motive. When Chloe took the stand, it was clear she had made a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she was testifying against Julian. Her story was a self-serving masterpiece of deflection, painting Julian as a manipulative monster who had preyed on her ambitions. But in her attempt to save herself, she corroborated everything. She admitted Julian had told her about the trust fund. She admitted he had been panicking about the upcoming audit. And most chillingly, she admitted to the rehearsal on the stairs. "He said it was a contingency plan," she said, avoiding looking at Julian, "in case she became difficult." He laughed about it. He said she was so clumsy everyone would believe it. Finally, it was Julian's turn. He was the picture of confidence, his testimony, a polished performance of the wronged husband. He was charming. He was emotional. He wept when he described the accident. It was a convincing show, but D.A. Powell was ready. She let him finish his story, and then she walked slowly toward him. "Mr. Ashford, you claim you loved your wife, that this was all a tragic accident, born from a moment of panic. Is that correct?" "Yes, absolutely," he said, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. "Then, can you explain this?" she asked, and a video screen flickered to life. It was security footage. Not from inside the house, the Ashfords were too smart for that, but from a camera on a neighboring estate pointing down the long, winding driveway. The timestamp was for 1 hour after I had been taken away in the ambulance. The footage showed Julian's car pulling up to the estate's gates. He got out of the driver's side. Then Chloe got out of the passenger side. They stood there for a moment, bathed in the car's headlights, and then Julian pulled her into his arms and kissed her a long, passionate kiss. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had just pulled off the perfect crime. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Julian's face went white. His carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces, revealing the smug, arrogant monster beneath. The jury was out for less than 3 hours. The verdict was read for each defendant separately. Richard and Isabella Ashford, guilty of obstruction of justice. Chloe Jenkins, guilty of conspiracy. And finally, Julian Ashford, on the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault, guilty. On all 17 counts of fraud and embezzlement, guilty. A wave of uncontrollable sobs shook my body. It was over. Justice, a concept that had seemed so distant and impossible, had finally prevailed. Across the room, I saw Isabella Ashford's mask of icy composure finally crack. She stared at her son, not with love, but with the cold fury of a CEO whose prize asset had just imploded. Julian simply stared ahead. His handsome face slack with shock. A man who had never in his life faced a single consequence, now facing the ultimate one. As they were led away in handcuffs, his eyes met mine one last time. There was no remorse, only a deep, burning hatred. But it didn't matter anymore. He was powerless. The monster was back in his cage. In the end, my story didn't conclude at the bottom of that staircase. It truly began there. While the Ashford empire and its lies crumbled into dust with Julian Chloe and his parents all facing justice behind bars, I was rebuilding my own world. It is no longer a gilded cage, but a home filled with the genuine love of my family and the beautiful, bright laughter of my daughter Lily. She is my daily proof that even from the deepest darkness, an even stronger light can emerge. Our journey is a testament that truth is a relentless force, and nothing is more powerful than a mother's will to protect her child. If this story of survival and justice resonated with you, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this video, and subscribing to the channel for more powerful stories. Thank you for listening. A man who had it all, a thriving business, a mansion in the suburbs, 2 beautiful children and a devoted wife of 15 years. From the outside, Julian Croft's life was the American dream. But behind the closed doors of their multi-million-dollar home, a nightmare was brewing. Fueled by a secret affair and a monstrous ego, he made an unthinkable choice. When his wife Clara discovered the truth, he didn't beg for forgiveness. He answered with his fists. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a brutal betrayal and the shocking court verdict that dismantled an empire and took everything from a man who believed he was untouchable. The scent of freshly cut grass and chlorine hung in the humid afternoon air of the manicured suburb of Westport, Connecticut. From the expansive kitchen window of her colonial-style mansion, Clara Croft watched her 2 children, 12-year-old Lily and 9-year-old Sam, their laughter echoing as they splashed in the cerulean blue of the in-ground pool. Everything in the frame looked perfect, like a page torn from a luxury lifestyle magazine. The pristine white siding of the house, the meticulously landscaped gardens, the high-end stainless steel appliances that reflected her strained face. It was a beautiful picture, but the canvas was beginning to fray at the edges. Her husband, Julian Croft, was the artist behind this masterpiece of a life. A charismatic and ruthlessly ambitious real estate developer, he had built his empire, Croft Holdings, from the ground up. He was the man everyone admired at the country club, the one who gave the most at charity auctions, the one whose confident baritone could command any room. To the world, he was a pillar of the community. To Clara, for 15 years, he had been her everything. She had met him in college. She was studying architecture, her mind buzzing with designs and blueprints. He was in business school, his eyes already set on a future of skyscrapers and lucrative deals. He'd swept her off her feet with his grand promises and unwavering ambition. "You and me, Clara," he'd whispered to her on their third date. "We're going to build an empire." And they did. But while he built his with steel and glass, she built hers within the walls of their home. She'd set aside her own career aspirations to raise their children, to host his business partners, to be the silent, supportive architect of his personal life, so he could conquer the professional one. For a long time, it was enough. But over the last year, a subtle chill had crept into their gilded cage. Julian, who once came home eager to share the day's victories, now returned late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, unfamiliar perfume he always blamed on a client or a colleague. He'd stare at his phone, a slight secretive smile playing on his lips, and quickly angle it away if she walked into the room. His compliments, once warm and genuine, now felt rehearsed and hollow. The distance between them in their king-sized bed had grown into a vast, cold canyon. "Another late one tonight, honey," he'd said that morning, not even looking up from his phone as he straightened his Tom Ford tie. "Closing the big Sinclair deal. It's a monster." The Sinclair deal. He'd been talking about it for months, and he'd been talking about Amber Sinclair for just as long. "My new VP of acquisitions," he'd introduced her at the company's Christmas gala. Amber was everything Clara wasn't anymore. She was in her late 20s, sharp-hungry, with a sleek blonde bob and a wardrobe of form-fitting power suits. She looked at Julian not with the comfortable love of a wife, but with the raw, undisguised admiration of a disciple or something more. Clara had felt a prickle of unease that night, a feeling she had quickly buried under layers of denial. It was just business. Julian was a handsome, powerful man. Of course, younger women would admire him. But the late nights became more frequent. The business trips on weekends where he was suddenly unreachable for hours began to pile up. A charge on the credit card statement for a boutique hotel in the city which he'd dismissed as an accidental booking for a client. A pair of delicate diamond earrings in his briefcase that he claimed were a gift for his mother, though Clara never saw her wear them. Each discovery was a small cut, a tiny tear in the fabric of her reality. She tried to confront him once, her voice trembling as she held up the hotel receipt. Julian had simply laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Clara, darling, you're being hysterical. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under? The Sinclair deal is worth over $50 million. I was winning and dining investors. Do you want this life? Do you want the house, the cars, the schools for the kids? Then let me do my job." He'd turned the tables so masterfully, making her feel small, paranoid and ungrateful. She had retreated ashamed of her suspicions. Tonight, however, was different. It was their 16th wedding anniversary. She had reminded him that morning. He'd blinked a flicker of something annoyance, forgetfulness in his eyes, before his charming mask slipped back into place. "Of course, darling. I'll be home by 7. I'll make a reservation at Per Se." It was now 9:30 p.m. The reservation had long since passed. The children were asleep. A single-place setting remained at the polished mahogany dining table beside a bottle of champagne sweating in a silver bucket. Clara sat in the silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, measuring out each second of her humiliation. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her friend, Maria. "Thinking of you on your anniversary. Hope Julian is spoiling you, rotten XOXO." Clara's fingers trembled as she typed a reply. Before she could, another message came through. It was an alert from the joint credit card account. American Express. A charge of $785.42 has been approved at the Gilded Lily restaurant. The Gilded Lily, a notoriously romantic, intimate restaurant in the city. A place for lovers. It wasn't per se, and it was a charge made just 15 minutes ago. He wasn't stuck in a late meeting. He was out dining with someone else on their anniversary. The cold dread that had been a subtle undercurrent for months now flooded her a tidal wave of ice. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about proof. The denial she had so carefully constructed crumbled into dust. He wasn't just distant. He was living a separate life, a life she was funding but was not invited to. As she stared at the notification on her phone, the name he'd mentioned that morning echoed in her mind. The Sinclair deal. Amber Sinclair. A sudden fierce resolve hardened her features. She would not sit here and wait for him to come home smelling of lies. She stood up, her movements stiff. She walked to his home office, a room she rarely entered. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she needed something tangible. A receipt, a note. Anything to prove she wasn't going insane. His laptop was open on his desk. She stared at it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was a violation of his privacy, an act of mistrust. But trust, she realized with a bitter pang, had already left the building. She touched the trackpad. The screen flickered to life. It was unlocked, and open on the screen was his personal email. The top message in the inbox made her breath catch in her throat. From Amber Sinclair. Subject. Tonight. Can't wait to have you all to myself tonight. Jay, forget the old ball and chain. The future is us. See you at our spot. All my love. A. The words blurred through her tears. Old ball and chain. That's what she was. A relic. An obstacle. The foundation upon which he built his empire, now just a nuisance to be forgotten. The confirmation didn't bring relief, only a profound, soul-crushing agony. The picture-perfect life was a lie. The gilded cage was a prison. And the man she loved was a stranger. The drive into Manhattan was a blur of streetlights and tears. Clara didn't have a plan. She was operating on pure, unadulterated adrenaline, and a pain so sharp it felt physical. The text message. The email. They were a 1-2 punch that had knocked the wind out of her, leaving her gasping for a truth she could no longer ignore. Every traffic light seemed to mock her, a glaring red symbol of the stop she should have put to her doubts months ago. She found the Gilded Lily nestled on a quiet, cobblestoned street in Soho. It was exactly as she'd imagined, discreet, elegant, with soft lighting that spilled onto the pavement, creating an aura of intimate secrets. She parked across the street, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What was she going to do, Storm, in Make a Scene? The thought was terrifying, so contrary to her nature. She was Clara Croft, the poised wife, the calm mother. She didn't cause public disturbances, but the woman sitting in the driver's seat of the Lexus SUV was no longer just Clara Croft. She was a woman betrayed, a woman whose entire world had been built on a foundation of lies. She watched the entrance for what felt like an eternity, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. And then she saw them. Julian emerged first, laughing, his arm draped possessively around Amber Sinclair's shoulders. Amber leaned into him, her blonde head resting on his chest for a moment, her face alight with a triumphant glow. She was wearing a stunning emerald green dress that clung to her body, a stark contrast to the conservative navy dress Clara wore. They looked like a power couple, radiant and untouchable. They looked like they belonged together. The sight was a dagger to Clara's heart, twisting with a brutal finality. He hailed a taxi. As he opened the door for Amber, he leaned in and kissed her a deep, passionate kiss under the soft glow of the street lamp. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was a lover's kiss full of intimacy and promise. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't a fling. This was a relationship, a whole other life he was living without her. She followed the taxi, her mind a maelstrom of rage and grief. Her thoughts raced. Were they going back to his office, to a hotel? The taxi didn't head for the highway back to Westport. Instead, it pulled up in front of a sleek, modern apartment building in Tribeca, one she didn't recognize. She watched as Julian paid the driver, and they disappeared inside his arm, still firmly around Amber's waist. Clara sat in her car for a long time. The silence of the vehicle, a stark contrast to the screaming in her head. She knew with a sickening certainty that this was their place. The monster deal wasn't just business. It was the construction of a new life with a new woman. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was replacing her. The drive home was slow and deliberate. The tears were gone, replaced by an icy resolve. The hurt was still there, a gaping wound in her chest, but it was now surrounded by a cold, hard anger. When she walked back into the silent, cavernous house, it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage, a set for a play in which she had been unknowingly playing the fool. Julian arrived home just after 2 a.m. He tried to be quiet, but the heavy front door clicked shut with a definitive thud. Clara was waiting for him in the dimly lit living room, sitting in one of the oversized armchairs. She hadn't changed. The single glass of untouched champagne still sat on the table beside her. He froze when he saw her, the charming mask momentarily slipping. "Clara, you're still up." "Happy anniversary, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his practiced apology already forming on his lips. "Honey, I am so sorry. The Sinclair deal, it went into extra innings. We had to wine and dine the Japanese investors. They're notoriously difficult. I completely lost track of time. My phone died. I feel terrible." The lies were so effortless, so smooth. A year ago, she would have believed him. She would have felt a pang of guilt for doubting him. Now she just felt pity. Pity for him and for the fool she had been. She stood up slowly. "The Gilded Lily," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Is that where the Japanese investors like to dine?" Julian's face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his handsome features looking suddenly gaunt under the dim light. What? What are you talking about?" "The credit card alert, Julian, for $785. At a table for two, I presume." She took a step closer. Her eyes locked on his. "And the apartment in Tribeca, is that where you hold your late-night business meetings? 2. He was cornered. For the first time in their marriage, she saw genuine panic in his eyes. His bluster deflated, replaced by a desperate scramble for a new lie. "Clara, you're not making any sense. You must be mistaken. You've been under a lot of stress." "Don't you dare!" she whispered, her voice trembling with repressed fury. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me again. I saw you, Julian. I saw you and Amber." The mention of Amber's name changed everything. The panic in his eyes hardened into something else, something cold and cruel. His posture shifted from defensive to aggressive. The mask was off. So what if you did? He sneered, his voice dropping to a low growl. What were you doing, following me, spying on me? You're pathetic. The insult struck her, but she held her ground. I am your wife. We have a family. We have a life. Or at least I thought we did. He let out a short, bitter laugh. A life? This isn't a life, Clara. It's a performance. You, the perfect housewife in her perfect mansion. Me, the provider. It's been a bore for years. He took a step towards her, his presence suddenly menacing. Amber. Amber understands me. She's smart. She's ambitious. She sees me for who I am, not just as a walking checkbook. Each word was a deliberate cruelty, designed to wound. He was dismantling their 15 years together, piece by piece, right in front of her. I gave up my career for you, she said, her voice breaking. I built this home. I raised your children. And you've been well compensated for it. He shot back, his eyes glinting with malice. Don't pretend you're a martyr. You love this house, you love money, you just don't want to share it. The argument escalated, their voices rising in the cavernous room. It was a torrent of every unspoken resentment, every buried frustration from the past few years. Clara accused him of betrayal, of lies, of disrespect. He in turn painted her as a clinging, ungrateful, paranoid woman who was holding him back. He was rewriting their entire history, casting himself as the victim, the man trapped in a gilded cage with a boring wife. Then Clara said the words that would prove to be the final, irrevocable turning point. I want you to leave, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Or I will. I'll take the children, and I will leave. We're done, Julian. His face contorted with rage. You'll do nothing, he seethed. This is my house. These are my children. You have nothing. You are nothing without me. They're my children too, and I will not have them raised by a liar and a cheat. That was when he lunged, but it was what he said next, his voice a venomous hiss that would haunt her forever. Amber was right. You're a leech. You need to be taught a lesson. The mention of Amber's name was the spark that ignited the inferno. It was one thing for Julian to be cruel, but to use his mistress's words as a weapon against his wife in their home, it was a desecration. It confirmed for Clara that this wasn't just Julian's decision. It was a shared cruelty, a verdict they had passed on her together. She said that... Clara's voice was barely a whisper, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a hollow shock. Julian's face was a mask of pure fury. He saw her shock not as a sign of pain, but as a weakness to be exploited. She sees you for what you are, Clara. A dead weight I've been dragging around for years. She told me I needed to cut you loose, and she was right. He was closing the space between them now, his large frame seeming to suck all the air out of the room. Clara instinctively took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. This was a side of Julian she had never seen. The charming veneer had been stripped away, revealing something ugly and violent beneath. Get out, Julian. She repeated, her voice stronger this time, fueled by a primal mix of fear and defiance. I mean it. Get out of this house now. This is my house, he roared, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. Everything you have is because of me. He was inches from her now, his finger jabbing at her chest. You are not going to ruin my life because you're feeling a little insecure. My insecurity, she cried, shoving his hand away. You're the one living a double life. You're the one destroying this family for a cheap affair. The moment the words cheap affair left her lips, something snapped in his eyes. His face, which had been red with anger, turned deathly pale. His rage became something colder, more focused. "Don't you dare talk about her that way," he hissed. He grabbed her by the upper arms, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. The strength in his grip was terrifying. Clara cried out, a mix of surprise and pain. "Let go of me, Julian. You're hurting me." "You want to know what hurt is?" He snarled, his face contorted. "Hurt is being trapped in a loveless marriage with a woman who hasn't had an original thought in a decade. Hurt is having to pretend to care about PTA meetings and garden parties while my life is passing me by." He shoved her backward. Clara stumbled her heel, catching on the edge of the expensive Persian rug. She fell hard, her head cracking against the sharp corner of the marble coffee table. A blinding, white-hot pain exploded behind her eyes. For a moment, the world went black. Stars bursting in her vision. Dazed, she lay on the floor, the room spinning around her. She could taste blood in her mouth. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard him standing over her. She expected to hear concern, maybe even panic at what he'd done. Instead, what she heard chilled her to the bone. "See," he said, his voice laced with a terrifying calm. "This is what happens when you push me. This is what you get." He wasn't sorry. He was justifying it. Clara pushed herself up onto her elbows, her vision slowly clearing. Her head throbbed with a nauseating rhythm. She touched her fingers to the back of her head, and they came away wet and sticky with blood. The sight of it, dark red against her pale skin, jolted her out of her daze. He had hurt her. He had physically, violently hurt her. For his mistress. "You hit me." She breathed the words, heavy with disbelief. "You fell," he corrected coldly. "You were hysterical, and you tripped. That's what happened. That's the story." He was already creating the narrative the next in a long line of lies. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was her adversary. He was a threat. The thought of her children asleep upstairs, oblivious to the monster their father had become, sent a jolt of pure protective terror through her. She had to get them out. She had to get them away from him. Scrambling to her feet, ignoring the dizzying pain in her head, she made a run for the grand staircase. "Stay away from me. Stay away from us." He was faster. He caught her at the base of the stairs, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her back with such force that she screamed. The pain was sharp and searing. "You are not going anywhere," he bellowed, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and sour with whiskey. "You're not taking my children. You're not taking my money. You will stay here, and you will play the part of the loving wife, or I swear to God, Clara, I will make your life a living hell." It was in that moment, with his hand twisted in her hair and his eyes filled with a hatred she never thought possible, that the love she once had for him died completely. It wasn't a slow fade. It was an instantaneous, violent death extinguished by his brutality. In its place, something new was born, a steely, unyielding resolve. With a surge of adrenaline she didn't know she possessed, she drove her elbow back into his gut. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She wrenched herself free, stumbling up the first few stairs. He lunged for her again, but this time she was ready. She turned and kicked out her heel, connecting squarely with his chest. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was enough to make him stagger backward. "Don't touch me again," she said, her voice low and shaking with a fury she'd never felt before. He stared at her, breathing heavily, more surprised than hurt. He saw the look in her eyes, The fear was gone, replaced by something he didn't recognize. Something that wasn't going to break. He straightened his shirt, his composure slowly returning. A cruel, calculating smirk spread across his face. "Fine," he said smoothly. "Have it your way. But you're making a very, very big mistake. You have no idea who you're dealing with." He turned and walked calmly to the front door. "I'll be at the club," he said over his shoulder, "when you've had time to cool down and see reason we can talk. But this conversation is over." The door clicked shut, leaving Clara alone in the echoing silence of the foyer. She stood trembling on the stairs, her hand flying to her throbbing head, her scalp aching where he had pulled her hair. The magnificent house, her gilded cage, now felt like a crime scene. She looked at her reflection in the large, ornate mirror on the wall. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. A thin trickle of blood ran from her hairline down her temple. She saw the bruises already beginning to form on her arms where he'd grabbed her. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a victim, and she had the evidence to prove it. Ignoring the pain, she walked on unsteady legs to the kitchen, grabbed a handful of ice, and wrapped it in a dish towel, pressing it to her head. Then she walked back to the living room and took out her phone. Her first instinct was to call the police, but Julian's parting threat echoed in her ears. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." He was powerful. He had connections. He would twist the story. He'd already told her what the story would be. She was hysterical. She fell. No. She needed a different kind of help. She took several clear, unflinching photos of her injuries, the cut on her head, the angry red marks on her arms, the developing bruise on her cheekbone where her face had hit the table. She time-stamped them. Then she scrolled through her contacts, her finger hovering over a name she hadn't needed in years, but one she had kept for a reason she never wanted to admit to herself. Her college friend, Eleanor Vance. Now one of the most feared and respected divorce attorneys in the state of New York. She pressed the call button. When Eleanor's sleepy voice answered, Clara's broke. "Ellie," she sobbed, the dam of her composure finally breaking. "It's Clara. I need your help. Julian. He hurt me." The next few hours were a blur of calculated, terrified action. On Eleanor's stark instructions over the phone, Clara did not wash the blood from her hair. She did not change her clothes. "Go to the emergency room in Stamford, not Westport," Eleanor commanded, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through Clara's panic. "Tell them exactly what happened. Use the word assaulted. Get a full medical report. Then pack a go-bag for you and the children. Only essentials. Passports, birth certificates, a few changes of clothes. Meet me at my office at 8 a.m. sharp. Do not go back to the house." Waking Lily and Sam was the hardest part. She gently shook them awake, her heart aching at their sleepy, confused faces. "We're going on a little adventure, sweethearts," she whispered, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. She helped them pack their favorite toys and books into their backpacks, her movements frantic but quiet. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. She expected Julian to walk back through the door at any moment. By 4 a.m., they were gone. Clara drove away from the mansion that had been her entire world for 15 years, not even daring to look at it in the rear-view mirror. The trip to the ER was humiliating. The nurses were kind, but the questions were clinical and sharp. The doctor documented every bruise, every cut, his expression grim. They gave her a pamphlet on domestic violence shelters. It all felt surreal, like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. Eleanor Vance's office was a sleek, minimalist space in a downtown skyscraper a world away from the chintz and comfort of Westport. Eleanor, or Ellie, as Clara had known her, was no longer the free-spirited art history major from college. She was a woman clad in a steel-grey power suit, her gaze intense, her presence formidable. She hugged Clara tightly, then immediately switched into professional mode. "Okay, Clara, let's get to work," she said, leading her to a conference room. "The medical report is crucial. Your photos are excellent. We filed for an emergency protective order this morning. He will be legally barred from the house and from contacting you or the children." Julian was served the papers at his office that afternoon. The explosion was immediate. Clara's phone, which she had been advised by Eleanor to keep on but not answer, lit up with a furious barrage of calls and texts. "Julian, what the hell is this? Are you insane? Julian, you can't keep me from my own children. I will destroy you for this, Clara. Julian, call me back now. You are making the biggest mistake of your life." Then came the calls from his lawyer, a notoriously aggressive attorney named Marcus Thorne. He left a chillingly polite voicemail for Eleanor, which she played for Clara on speakerphone. "Ms. Vance," Thorne's smooth voice began, "my client, Mr. Croft, is deeply concerned for his wife's mental stability. He informs me she had a hysterical episode last night, tripped and hit her head. Her accusations are slanderous and are clearly a ploy for a larger settlement in a divorce she seems intent on pursuing. We are prepared to fight this with every resource at our disposal." "He's already spinning it," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Of course he is," Eleanor said calmly, her eyes like chips of flint. "This is what men like Julian Croft do. They control the narrative. Our job is to take that control away from him, and we do that with facts, not emotion." The first battle began immediately. Julian, through his lawyer, filed a motion to have the protective order thrown out, submitting affidavits from friends and business partners attesting to his gentle nature and Clara's recent emotional volatility. Simultaneously, he cut her off financially. Every joint credit card was declined. The debit card for their shared account was frozen. Suddenly, Clara, a woman who had never had to look at a price tag, couldn't even buy her children a happy meal. Eleanor had anticipated this. She had a fund set aside for clients in exactly this situation. She put Clara and the children up in a secure extended-stay hotel and gave her a prepaid credit card for immediate expenses. "He thinks he can starve you out," Eleanor explained, her expression grim. "He wants you desperate and crawling back to him, willing to accept whatever scraps he throws your way. We are going to show him how badly he has underestimated you." The next 2 weeks were a grueling introduction to Clara's new reality. Life was a series of meetings with lawyers, forensic accountants, and child psychologists. The children were confused and scared. Lily was old enough to sense the tension and asked difficult questions Clara struggled to answer. Sam had started having nightmares. The secure but sterile hotel suite felt a world away from their sprawling home and backyard. Julian, meanwhile, launched a campaign of psychological warfare. He used their mutual friends to get messages to her, painting himself as the heartbroken husband worried about his unstable wife. He sent lavish gifts for the children to the hotel, along with notes saying how much their daddy missed them, a move Eleanor identified as a clear attempt to manipulate the kids and guilt-trip Clara. But Julian's arrogance was his Achilles heel. He believed he was invincible, that his money and influence made him untouchable. He refused every settlement offer Eleanor put on the table, convinced he could crush Clara in court. "He wants to go to war, Ellie," Clara said one evening, exhausted after another 10-hour day of depositions. "He wants to humiliate me." "Let him," Eleanor replied with a thin smile. Arrogant men make mistakes, and while he's busy trying to prove you're an unfit mother, my team is doing a deep dive into something he values more than his children, his money. The forensic accounting team Eleanor had hired was led by a quiet, meticulous man named David Brown. He spent weeks combing through thousands of pages of financial documents from Croft Holdings. At first, everything seemed to be in order. Julian's company was on the surface a massive success, valued at over $100 million. But David Brown was looking for the things Julian didn't want anyone to see. He cross-referenced LLCs, followed money into offshore accounts, and analyzed investment patterns. One evening, he called Eleanor with a tremor of excitement in his voice. "I think I've found something," he said. "It's a series of wire transfers, very cleverly hidden. Large sums of money moving from Croft Holdings into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The name of the corporation is AS Enterprises." "A.S.," Eleanor repeated slowly. "Amber Sinclair." "That's what I thought," David confirmed. "It looks like he's been systematically siphoning millions of dollars out of the marital asset pool and hiding it. But it gets worse. I've been looking at the projections for his latest development, the big Sinclair deal he's so proud of. The numbers are creative. He's leveraged the company to the hilt to fund this thing. He's counting on a massive payday. But if anything goes wrong, a shift in the market, a delay in construction, the whole house of cards could come crashing down." Eleanor hung up the phone, a predatory gleam in her eye. Julian wasn't just a cheater and an abuser. He was a fraud. He was trying to hide assets from his wife while simultaneously gambling the entire family's fortune on a risky venture, likely at the urging of his new partner. "Clara," Eleanor said, turning to her client, "we need to talk. I think we just found the key to dismantling Julian Croft's entire empire." The first battle had been about survival. The next one would be about justice. The discovery of AS Enterprises shifted the entire landscape of the case. It was no longer just a contentious divorce. It was a potential case of large-scale financial fraud. Eleanor Vance knew that in a high-stakes divorce, the person who controls the financial narrative often wins. Julian had tried to paint Clara as a gold digger, but Eleanor was about to paint him as a thief. The forensic accountant, David Brown, delved deeper. He worked tirelessly, his team tracing the flow of money like digital bloodhounds. They discovered that AS Enterprises wasn't just a holding company. It had made significant investments. It had purchased a multi-million-dollar apartment in Tribeca, the one Clara had seen them enter, and a portfolio of luxury goods, a new Porsche expensive jewelry designer clothes. All of it paid for with money funneled from Croft Holdings, money that was legally half Clara's. He wasn't just having an affair, Eleanor explained to a stunned Clara. He was building a new life for Amber with your money. He was systematically liquidating your shared future to fund his. The betrayal cut deeper than Clara could have imagined. It wasn't just infidelity. It was calculated, cold-blooded theft. While she was managing their home and raising their children, he had been meticulously stealing from them. But David Brown found something even more damning. Julian's monster Sinclair deal was a ticking time bomb. He had secured massive loans based on inflated property value projections and fraudulent occupancy commitments. It was a classic developer's gamble, but on a colossal scale. He had essentially mortgaged the entire company on this one project. "He's in a precarious position," David summarized. "He needs this project to succeed, or he's facing total financial ruin and possibly even criminal charges for bank fraud. He is desperate." This desperation explained his aggression. his refusal to settle. He couldn't afford to give Clara a fair share of the company, because in reality the company's value was a fiction. He needed every penny to keep his house of cards from collapsing. Eleanor knew they needed more than just financial records. They needed a human element, someone from the inside. "Who did he fire recently?" Eleanor asked Clara one afternoon. "Think back over the last year. Any senior people let go suddenly?" Clara thought for a moment. "There was Robert Aiken," she recalled. "He was the chief financial officer for almost a decade, a very by-the-book, cautious man. Julian replaced him about 8 months ago. He said Robert was too conservative for the company's new aggressive growth phase. He promoted someone younger." "Who did he promote?" Eleanor asked, her pen poised over her legal pad. "I think his name was Greg Milner. Julian liked him because he was a yes man." Eleanor's team immediately went to work trying to find Robert Aiken. They located him in Florida, where he'd taken an early retirement. At first, he was reluctant to speak, bound by a non-disclosure agreement and a hefty severance package. But Eleanor was persuasive. She explained that she wasn't interested in his breach of the NDA, but in potential criminal fraud he might have been pressured to overlook it. She flew down to meet him in person. Over coffee, in a quiet Tampa cafe, Robert Aiken, a man with a tired face and honest eyes, finally opened up. "Julian Croft is a brilliant salesman." Robert began stirring his coffee. "He can sell sand in the desert. But his ethics, they became flexible. It all started when Amber Sinclair came on board. She was ambitious and she fed his ego. She convinced him he was a visionary, that traditional risk assessment was for lesser men." Robert detailed how Amber and Julian had cooked up the Sinclair deal. He had warned Julian repeatedly that the financial models were reckless, that they were misleading investors and the banks. "I told him it was fraud, plain and simple." Robert said, his voice low. "I refused to sign off on the loan documents, so he offered me a generous package to retire and replaced me with Greg Milner, who would sign anything Julian put in front of him. I took the money because I have a family to support, and I knew Julian would ruin my reputation if I went public. He would have painted me as a disgruntled employee." Robert Aiken was their star witness. He could testify to the company's true financial state and Julian's fraudulent activities. He even had copies of his original undoctored financial models for the Sinclair project, which he had saved on a personal hard drive as an insurance policy. While the financial case was building, Eleanor didn't neglect the domestic abuse charge. Julian's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was working hard to discredit Clara, preparing to argue that her injuries were self-inflicted in a desperate grab for money. "They will try to tear you apart on the stand, Clara," Eleanor warned her. "They will bring up every argument you ever had, every time you were emotional. They will try to paint you as unstable." Clara felt a knot of fear in her stomach. "But he assaulted me. I have the medical report." "And they will say you are a liar. It will be your word against his. Julian Croft, the beloved community leader, versus the hysterical housewife. In court, it's about what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt." Clara's face fell. It seemed so unfair. Just as despair began to set in, she remembered something. It was a small detail, something she hadn't thought was important. "The living room," she said slowly. "A few months ago, Julian installed a new smart home. You know, voice-activated controls for the lights, music, security. He loved showing it off." Eleanor sat bolt upright. "What's the brand name of the system?" Clara told her. Eleanor immediately got on the phone with a tech expert. "These devices," the expert explained, "they're always listening for a wake word. But they also store short, temporary audio buffers, and sometimes during a significant auditory event like a loud crash or a scream, the device can be triggered to save a recording to the cloud. The chance was slim, but it was a chance. Eleanor's team drafted a subpoena for the tech company, demanding any and all audio files recorded in the Croft residence on the night of the assault. Julian's lawyers fought it ferociously, citing privacy concerns, but the judge, intrigued by the possibility, granted the request. Weeks went by. The trial date loomed. Clara was a nervous wreck preparing for the character assassination she knew was coming. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor called her. "We got it, Clara," Eleanor said, her voice tight with excitement. "The company sent the file. It's 37 seconds long. I'm sending it to you now. Brace yourself." Clara's hands trembled as she opened the email and downloaded the audio file. She put her phone to her ear and pressed play. The quality was slightly muffled, but it was undeniably clear. It began with the sound of her own voice, strained and high-pitched, destroying this family for a cheap affair. Then Julian's voice, low and menacing. "Don't you dare talk about her that way." There was the sound of a scuffle, her own pained cry. "Let go of me, Julian. You're hurting me." And then his voice dripping with venom. "You want to know what hurt is? Hurt is being trapped in a loveless marriage." The recording continued, capturing the sickening thud of her head hitting the table, followed by a moment of silence, and then Julian's chilling, damning words. "See, this is what happens when you push me. This is what you get." It was all there. His rage, his violence, and most importantly, his own admission, his justification of the act. He hadn't said, "Did you fall?" He had said, "This is what happens when you push me." It was proof, irrefutable, undeniable proof. Clara sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness this time. They were tears of relief. Julian Croft, the master of the narrative, had no idea that his own beloved gadget had been recording the truth. His own arrogance had once again become his greatest enemy. The courtroom was Julian Croft's new stage, and he played the part of the wronged husband to perfection. Dressed in a somber, bespoke suit, he sat beside his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. He cast sorrowful glances toward Clara, a performance for the judge who would decide his fate. Across the aisle, Clara sat beside Eleanor Vance, a silent statue of resolve, her hands clasped to still their trembling. The trial began with a brutal, calculated assault on Clara's character. Marcus Thorne, a master of courtroom theatre, called witnesses who painted Clara as emotional and erratic. He twisted her fear of Julian's affair into a narrative of obsession and paranoia. When Clara took the stand, Thorne's cross-examination was a masterclass in insinuation. "Mrs. Croft," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Isn't it true you were terrified of losing the luxurious lifestyle your husband provided? Isn't it true that when you discovered he had a new successful colleague, you became hysterical and followed him, fabricating this story of abuse to secure a larger settlement?" Through it all, Clara held her ground, her voice steady. "I was terrified of the man who was lying to me and hurting me," she stated, simply refusing to let Thorne rattle her, but she could feel the doubt he was planting in the air. Soon it was Julian's turn to testify. He strode to the witness box with an air of confidence, flashing a reassuring smile at the judge. He recounted his version of their anniversary night with polished ease. "Clara was hysterical," he said, his voice laced with regret. She was making wild accusations. She lost her footing and tragically she fell. It was a terrible accident. I would never ever lay a hand on my wife. Eleanor Vance began her cross-examination, her questions like surgical incisions. She first dismantled his financial empire. She produced the wire transfers to AS Enterprises, the shell company named for Amber Sinclair. Mr. Croft, you used this company to funnel over $4 million of marital assets to purchase an apartment and a Porsche for your mistress, did you not? Julian sputtered, his composure cracking. It's a legitimate corporate entity. Then Eleanor called Robert Aiken, the former CFO. Aiken calmly and methodically exposed the truth of Croft Holdings. He testified that the company was leveraged to the hilt, propped up by fraudulent loan applications for the Sinclair deal, a project he called a catastrophe waiting to happen. Julian's face turned ashen as the image of his untouchable empire was revealed to be a house of cards. But Eleanor saved her final devastating blow for the assault itself. Your Honor, she announced, the plaintiff would like to introduce one final piece of evidence. A court officer placed a speaker on the table. Julian watched a knot of confusion and fear tightening in his chest. Mr. Croft, Eleanor said, her voice sharp, you testified under oath that your wife's injury was an accident, that she fell. Is that correct? That is the absolute truth, Julian declared, his voice a shade too loud. Then perhaps you can explain this, Eleanor said, and pressed play. The courtroom fell silent, filled only by the tinny audio from the smart home device. First came Clara's voice, destroying this family for a cheap affair. Then Julian's menacing reply, the sounds of a scuffle, and Clara's pained cry. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was locked on Julian Croft as his face contorted in a mask of pure horror. He looked like a man watching his own execution. A sickening thud echoed from the speaker, followed by a collective gasp from the gallery. And finally Julian's own voice, clear as day, dripping with cold justification. See? This is what happens when you push me. This is what you get. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus Thorne dropped his head into his hands. Julian stared at the speaker as if it were a venomous snake, his mouth agape. He had been exposed not by a witness, but by his own voice, his own words, his own monstrous truth. Eleanor let the silence hang in the air before delivering the final blow. Mr. Croft, she said quietly but with immense power, this is what happens when you push me. Those are not the words of a man witnessing an accident. They are the words of an abuser. The verdict delivered 2 days later was an annihilation. Judge Miller, looking down from the bench, found Julian Croft guilty of assault. She referred him to the district attorney's office for perjury. The protective order was made permanent. On the division of assets, the judgment was even more ruinous. Citing Julian's egregious financial misconduct in attempting to hide millions with his mistress, the judge awarded Clara 100% of the value of those stolen funds. The apartment, the car, the jewelry. It was all hers. She was then awarded 70% of the remaining marital assets, which, thanks to Robert Aiken's testimony, was now understood to be 70% of a bankrupt, debt-ridden company. Clara was granted sole legal and physical custody of their children. Julian was permitted supervised visitation twice a month, but only after completing a year-long batterer's intervention program. His child support and alimony payments were based on his former 9-figure income, a crippling sum he now had no way to earn. As a final indignity, the judge awarded Clara exclusive use of the Westport mansion, giving Julian 48 hours to remove his personal belongings under court supervision. As the verdict was read, Julian sat frozen. The color drained from his face. His amour, his reputation, his family, all gone. In the gallery, he saw Amber Sinclair slip out of the door, abandoning the sinking ship, without a backward glance. He had lost everything for a woman who was now running from the wreckage. The aftermath was a swift and total collapse. Croft Holdings filed for bankruptcy. The media savaged him. He became a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at the country clubs he could no longer afford. Clara, guided by Eleanor, made no attempt to salvage Julian's toxic legacy. She sold the cavernous mansion and its haunting memories. She sold the Tribeca apartment and the Porsche. After her legal fees were paid, she was left with a comfortable but modest nest egg. She bought a smaller, light-filled house in a new town, a place with no ghosts. She enrolled Lily and Sam in the local school and started taking architecture classes again, rediscovering the part of herself she had sacrificed for Julian. Her life was no longer one of extreme luxury, but it was filled with peace and purpose. It was real. A year later, while gardening in her new backyard, she received a postcard from Florida. It was from Robert Aiken. Clara. It read, "What you did took incredible courage. Thank you." She held the note to her chest and smiled. The gilded cage had been demolished. She had lost a fortune, but in exchange, she had won back her freedom, her future, and herself. She was no longer Julian Croft's wife. She was just Clara, and for the first time in a very long time, she was truly home. Clara's story is a powerful testament to the fact that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. It's a chilling reminder that the most polished facades can hide the darkest secrets. Julian Croft believed his money and power made him invincible, but he forgot that character is the one asset you can't buy, and the easiest one to lose. He beat his wife for his mistress, and in the end, the scales of justice didn't just balance, they tipped so far, they crushed the very foundations of his world. This story is about more than just a verdict. It's about the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the courage it takes to walk away from a beautiful lie to build a true life. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if you believe in the power of justice, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear a story of strength and survival. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. What part of Clara's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.